Alright, so it's a little bit loud here because I just say having a bit of fun, but it's what it's supposed to be fine. So Nikhil, you wanna help me out?
Hello Sachith.
How you doing, Nikhil?
I'm doing fine, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic.
Alright, let's get straight to it. Cut to the chase here. What is the most important or most significant thing you've taken out of it?
Well, I'm a U.S. citizen. Before I say any of this, so and I grew up with a U.S. public education. So I will admit, when I came into this class, I was a bit biased, and I saw the West is good and Chinese communism is bad, and that was my only judgment right away. But the more I look into it, the more I've kind of gotten the idea that the West isn't all we make them out to be, and the foreign influence on China wasn't necessarily the best thing. And I'm not a big fan of saying things are just the way they are if they happen once. So, China in its early days, the Shah dynasty, you had that virtuous ruler Yao, Yao Shun, and who's the last one? You. Thank you. And well, that was like an ideal, like it was an ideal times. You were creating a virtuous ruler. You were establishing the basic, like, cornerstones of society then. And this was, mind you, when China was isolated because of the Gobi Desert, the Taklamakan. Thank you. And on top of that, it had the Yell and the Wei rivers. So in this time, it was isolated. And mind you, it did have its troubles. Like, there's no utopian society because that's just like impossible. But it did have some internal conflicts later on, as we can see. The dynasty cycle is basic proof of that. You can't have a dynasty last forever. There will be problems, and a bad dynasty will be replaced. And there will be attacks from barbarians like the Xiongnu, and you will have disagreements between, you'll have class struggle, peasants, and that type of thing. But for the most part, China figured things out for itself. When there was a flood, they figured it out. When there was a bad ruler, they figured it out. But it was only when the West came that things started to get messed up. Now, if I remember correctly, I believe Marco Polo was the first to come in 13th century, I want to say 1270 about. Years aren't important, as Mr. Brill says. But when he came, this was during the time Kublai Khan was in power, and he came back and he wrote a book on China then. And this kind of sparked interest of the West in China. And as that happened, you know, it kind of moved forward, and it kind of set off, you might say, the whole oh my God, can they be quiet? Jeez, these kids. And it kind of set off the start of foreign influence on China. And it really began, because I wouldn't say Marco Polo was really the beginning. I would say he was more of like a starting point, but he wasn't exactly the first influential one, so I guess you could say he's a starting point. Sorry. But anyway, the first I would consider was Yongle, who, you know, in the Chinese attempt to, well, they took to the seas basically, and they started meeting rulers from other countries to get support for the dynasty. And this was where they started interacting with the foreign powers. And even then, they brought back some ambassadors, and they allowed them to stay at the summer palace. They treated them extremely, extremely well. So at this point, they still had their control. The West and foreign powers weren't exactly doing anything. But the second the West tried to influence China, because at this point it wasn't necessarily the West trying to influence China or the foreign powers trying to influence China. They were rather just pledging their support to China, and in return, China treated them extremely well, giving them gifts from their treasure ships, allowing them to stay in China. It was a mutual benefit type thing. But it was, let's see, I believe McCartney, I don't remember the years, I want to say sometime in the 1600s. McCartney in the 1600s kind of began that sort of idea. Oh man, is it so, okay, good, it's still going. What? I thought it stopped for a second.
Keep going.
But yeah, where was I? McCartney, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So McCartney was kind of the one that started off this kind of West trying to change China. And this is where I really consider, and this is where I would like to stress, is a turning point for the negative influence that the West has brought on China. Now, I want to clarify, I'm not saying that everything the West does towards China is bad, but I am saying, had the West never tried to influence China, who knows, China might have been in a better way, might not have gone through the age of humiliation, and for all we know, there never would have been that nationalist communist split, and it's just, you could never know. I mean, that's why it's a turning point. It changed the course of history. Anyway, Kangxi first tried to agree with and get along with the ambassadors, and mind you, at the time, China was Confucian then, so you had all the ideals of ritual, importance of filial piety, and that type of thing. So Kangxi was actually benevolent enough to allow the missionaries to, the missionaries were allowed to come into China, and they were allowed to convert them. However, they were allowed to be, I would say, kind of dual Confucian, what would you say? Like, it's dual Confucian, but like they retain their Confucian values while still adhering to the Christian faith. But then, as that went on, the Pope ended up changing his mind, and the Pope was, at first, that Confucian aspect that the people kept in their lives was considered cultural. Therefore, it did not go against Rome's views, and it was not considered a religion. But as that went on, you kind of got to see this idea that it was a religion, and then the Pope declared that not in order. Iron fist of the Pope. But as that went on, you might want to say that Kangxi still tried to agree with it. He met with the ambassadors. He met with people that the Pope sent. He still tried to get things done, and he still tried to make a compromise. But the Pope wouldn't budge. Made a declaration. Not sure of the name. And after that, Kangxi just expelled the Christian missionaries because they were attempting to change so much of China's history. They were attempting the Confucian classics. It's undoubtedly one of the, like, a cornerstone, a pillar of China's history. And they were trying to negate all of that and force the Chinese people to give that up. And that is the main reason that they were expelled. So in that aspect, Kangxi was right. However, of course, the West, with its international policeman ideal, even then they had it, they still wanted to get involved, and they would not let that go. And then, in 1839, you had your first Opium War. They were influencing China heavily. And China, looking out for its people and realizing that opium was poisoning the minds of its people, went to stop this. But obviously, the profit of the opium trade was unbelievable. And the British were not willing to give that up. Oh, okay, cool. Anyway, so starting from 1840, you can basically say the age of humiliation started. Underdeveloped China got crushed by the West, and basically it was just the beginning of a long, long struggle for China, and you can see as we go on, it does not get any better. So there is one example, another example of the West being, there's another example right there of the West negatively influencing China, the opium. And on top of that, after they defeated China, they forced their missionaries into China, and they converted them, and they gave themselves all the demands that McCartney gave. Like, McCartney wanted missionaries in the capital, wanted more trade ports, which Kangxi denied him. But after that, I'm ranting, am I? But after that, they just took it because they won, and they just used their brute force to take what they wanted. Negative influence right there. And afterwards, this led into the Boxer Rebellion. The Christian Chinese and the Westernized Chinese got into arguments and fights with the national Chinese, who still retained some of their old values. Oh, come on. And then, as a result of this, I believe it was 500,000 people died, but a huge amount of people died. And then side of the nationalists, for the sole reason that they hate communism. They are negatively influencing China's internal struggle just because In fact, it was the outside powers and the foreign powers that created this divide in the first place. But anyway, the West tries to make their side win for the sole reason that they are against communism. And finally, you look at today. You have China is holding the West up. If China pulled out its trade from the West, actually, it's a mutual type thing. And because of this, the U.S. is dependent on China, China is dependent on the U.S., and I believe, last time I read, U.S. is $1.1 trillion in debt to China. So, starting to recap, I'm sorry, you didn't really interview, I just went off on this.
That's cool,
Yeah.
It's always nice.
But, starting from that first time when...
Actually, so how about you recap?
Yeah, thank you. I will summarize.
Yeah.
Basically, main point is Western influence is not necessarily all the good things that we think of. They aren't saving the Chinese. They aren't doing anything beneficial. And there was no way we will ever know if the Chinese would have been better off. But I'm pretty sure it is safe to say that the Chinese may have ended up better without this Western constant need to influence and try to change China's policy. We see it in Kangxi's time. We see it in the Mao years. We see it with the Boxer Rebellion. We see it Opium Wars. We see it in today's times. I mean, even now, China's under constant pressure to be more democratic by the U.S., let more religions in. And therefore, to wrap it up, Western influence isn't all that we see it as. Thanks, Mr. Bro.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikhil.